Jori Epstein, Frank Schwab. I'm Jason Fitz. Welcome to Inside Coverage. We're going to get into a lot of coaching changes because there have been some surprising non-changes. There's been some surprising changes. There's chaos, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria everywhere. I'm fired up. I'll just be the first to say it. I'm fired up. But before we get to what I'm fired up about, everybody, obviously Antonio Pierce. Before we get to that, there's actual football news that doesn't involve coaching. I want to start with Tyreek Hill because Tyreek Hill sort of made the internet explode with his post-game comments on Sunday. He said, quote, "I have to do what's best for me and my family. If that's here or wherever the case may be, I'm about to open that door for myself. I'm out, bro. It was great playing here, but at the end of the day, I have to do what's best for my career." First and foremost, Jori, is Tyreek Hill requesting a trade? Like, where are we on this right now?
Yeah, Tyreek Hill, as of the time that we're recording this on Wednesday, has not requested a trade. And I think that's what we have to understand is what someone says in the heat of an emotion after the game compared with their follow-up actions, not the same thing. I give Dolphins head coach Mike McDaniel some credit because he said, look, I'm not going to address this with him now. I'm going to let him cool down. What I would actually say is more concerning to me than Tyreek Hill's comments is some of the other comments that were coming out surrounding the Dolphins. Because look, I've interviewed Tyreek Hill when he was with the Kansas City Chiefs before, and I have interviewed him when he was with the Miami Dolphins. And respectfully, Tyreek kind of just says what's on his mind. There's not a lot of filter. I think he and most people close to him would agree with that sentiment. And so to me, what he says and what he does, I think we can put in two different categories, also recognizing that the history of the NFL is that if you are as talented as Tyreek Hill is, or even a little bit below that, you can pretty much say whatever you want and they still want you there. I had someone ask me this week, do you really want Tyreek Hill in Miami if he doesn't want to be there? The answer is yes. If he's still playing, as long as he's not taking himself out of every game, as he might have done in the last quarter when he was hurt, then, no, I know, but last quarter of the season, he might have been hurt, might have been not, whatever, then you want him there. But to me, what was more concerning is apparently there have been multiple Dolphins players repeatedly late to meetings, and Mike McDaniel has tried to discipline them for it, and it's not really working. And Mike McDaniel addressed that on the record. And so I don't think the problem here is, does Tyreek Hill want to leave? I think the problem here is, why do you have players not showing up, not being there on time, not staying until the end of the game? Like the whole show, be early, stay late. And at UT, it was show up early, stay late, be loud, wear orange. So I guess they don't need to wear orange necessarily. But I think that's my question, is how much of this is reflective of a Dolphins culture? Because the Tyreek part doesn't concern me as much as the Dolphins culture element.
Yeah, a few things on Tyreek. This is the ultimate, if you're good enough, you can get by with anything. Because what he did was no different than Devondre Campbell. It really wasn't. He refused to go into a game. That should be pretty much inexcusable. But Tyreek Hill is Tyreek Hill, so it's different. Secondly, I found it hilarious that Tyreek Hill changed his profile picture on X to his face photoshopped over Antonio Brown leaving the field. Really? That's the guy you want to compare yourself to right now, Tyreek? Ooh, all right, then. That's something. That's a statement, I guess. But really what it comes down to me is, you talked about it. You said this, Jori. Do you want Tyreek Hill around if he's doing this and doing that? And the answer is yes. I say, Tyreek Hill just played 17 games and didn't even get 1,000 yards. He's 30 years old. I think this is an exit ramp for the Dolphins. I don't think Tyreek Hill's the same player. Yes, he had some games with bad quarterbacks. I get that. But at what point this season did Tyreek Hill look like Tyreek Hill? This was a troubling downturn. His yards per game were cut in half. He looked like he might not be cooked, but he looks like he's definitely on the back nine, and he might be on the 17th hole, deep on the back nine. So I don't know that Tyreek Hill is still that dude.
Who was his quarterback for most of these games?
Wait. I got an answer.
Most of them.
I'm in on this. I'm in on this.
Most. You're
look at the stats. I'll be a stat nerd for a minute. Right now, if you look this year in overall targets, for example, Tyreek Hill was 19th, for example. But let's just take the stat line of catches, targets, and yardage. He was below Jacoby Myers in all three of those. Who was Jacoby Myers' quarterback? Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. So if we're going to sit here and say who is Tyreek Hill's quarterback,
they are better than Huntley or whoever they were trotting out there. I can't even. Tim Boyle got a start or something like that. Yeah, I get it. He didn't have great quarterback play, but at what point did you watch Tyreek Hill this season and say, yes, that's the explosive Tyreek Hill we all know? It wasn't happening. And there's many reasons for that, but also we got to keep in mind he's going to be 31 years old next year, and he's a guy who relies entirely on being the fastest guy in the field. So I don't know. I'm just saying, and also changing the culture. I think this is a big part of it too. And you started talking about that, Jori. it really seems like this Dolphins team, although they've been successful in this season, they didn't make the playoffs pretty much because Tua missed games. Like when Tua played, they were still a pretty good football team. But all of a sudden, you're having a lot of questions about the culture, and Chris Greer comes back, and Mike McDaniel comes back. I think McDaniel's a good coach. I do. But when guys are just like, whatever, I'm not showing up to meetings, I wonder if that is really, you can't fix that at some point unless you really do something drastic. Maybe getting rid of the guy who wouldn't check back into the second half of a game when you're still technically alive for the playoffs. Maybe that's one way to change the culture a little bit. I don't know. I'm just saying, I don't know that we're to the
Mike
point with
McDaniel's style.
It's really not. He's a player's
isn't
guy,
there a problem at some point, Jori? Like most coaches, if your team is just not respecting the coach, and you can see it palpably, like if somebody chooses not to come back into a game and then a coach comes out and says, to your point earlier, that, I've tried finding people, I can't do much more about it. Well, man, if the team disrespects the coach so much, like I agree with we all feel like Mike McDaniel's a very good coach, but if we take the massive, 70-0 win over the Broncos or whatever it was from last year out of this whole equation, are we viewing Mike differently? Because right now what we see is a coach that didn't make the playoffs and a coach that doesn't even have enough respect from his own locker room for guys to show up on time. Like we would absolutely destroy most coaches for having that level of insubordination on a staff. Like the whole Mike Tomlin, how you'll do anything is how you'll do everything, or whatever that is. Like these coachisms, well, they're not respecting their coach enough to even show up, even when it's costing them money. Like that at some point has to be reflective of a problem with Mike McDaniel.
I think this is actually interesting because to me, it speaks to what's going on with two playoff teams right now. Because in Philadelphia, we have Vic Fangio as defensive coordinator, and we are watching Vic Fangio have this fantastic season. The defense is responding to him. They love what he's done. They love how he's put personnel in creative places. And this is right after the Miami Dolphins were like, we don't want to work with him. This guy sucks. Like they were not very flattering about Vic Fangio. And it's interesting also to me because I think the same question about the Miami culture is going to influence the Brian Flores interviews. So obviously there's a lawsuit going on as well. And it's not clear to me how exactly that will impact his ability to get a head coaching job. But when you look at what he's done and how effective he has been with the Minnesota Vikings unit, I think what's interesting is I asked an executive yesterday, I said, do you think that lawsuit will keep him from getting jobs? Like, can he get a job? And the executive responded, the lawsuit's the least of his concerns. I would be more concerned if I'm hiring him about what Tua and the Dolphins players were saying. And while I do believe in treating people right, and I do believe personally in a positive, encouraging, uplifting culture, I think what's interesting is that a guy like Vic Fangio, a guy like Brian Flores, not good fits in Miami, good fits in Minnesota and Philadelphia. And I think we might be seeing some of this of like, there are coaches who are going to thrive more in that Florida culture where the standards and the expectations are a little bit different than some of these other teams. And I'm not trying to sound like, oh, New York or like Northeast, we're tougher up here. I'm not from here anyway. But I do think there's an element of what culture for years has been expected in Miami. And is this a new thing or is this something that has been building over time?
I just think the shocking part of this is now what we have is one of the biggest names in the NFL, who has been one of the best players in the NFL, basically coming out and throwing his team under the bus, and then a coach throwing the whole culture under the bus, and nobody really standing up to address how it's going to be fixed or different next year. Like, what is part of this has to be, okay, if you bring Tyreek back into the fold, what are the Dolphins going to do to get this better, to make this right, and then to fix whatever is happening in their locker room? Because above and beyond the quarterback issues on this, which I know are huge. I understand that Tua being hurt is a part of this, but Tua's hurt all the time. So number one, how are you addressing that? Number two, how are you fixing your culture? And number three, what are you doing to actually make the Dolphins a better football team between now and the beginning of next season? Because the Dolphins are a team every year, Frank, we sit here and praise as one of the teams that should be viewed as a contender. And yet again, at the end of the season, we're looking at them saying, meh, they're just kind of meh as a franchise.
Yeah, and for the first time in this episode, I'm going to say something that I'll repeat over and over. Bad teams stay bad because of bad ownership. Stephen Ross is a bad owner. That's it. There's a common thread. We talk about how the culture was bad with Flores, culture was bad with McDaniel. Like, well, I mean, there's a guy in charge of this franchise who is not very good. And that's the problem with a lot of teams. So we're going to start talking about coaching vacancies. it starts at the top generally. And I just don't think from the top down, the Dolphins are a well-run organization. They've proven that over the past a long time now. When's the last time the Dolphins were really, truly relevant? Where you said, oh, wow, the Dolphins are a Super Bowl contender. Like, it's been decades. It shouldn't take you that long. And it all starts at the top to me. And I don't know that this Dolphins thing is really bad. Like, when they brought back Chris Greer, like, if you, like, not that fan reaction is everything. I get that. But, man, I don't think there was a fan in South Florida that was excited about Chris. Everybody wanted him out. Like, what do you do? Like, every reaction was, this team is broken. They've screwed up so many things, and yet you're bringing the general manager back? Like, why? What's the point in this? And I think it all points back to Stephen Ross, as it does for the Bears or the Jets or the Panthers, the issues we've talked about with them. Bad teams stay bad because of bad ownership.
I think it's also an interesting question because, when the Titans fired general manager Rand Carthon this week, I reached out to someone who used to work there, who's now working for another team in the league, and the response was dysfunctional teams do dysfunctional things, kind of what you're saying, Frank, same idea. But what I would ask, because I wrote a very similar piece in terms of the Patriots and how Robert Kraft handled the Gerard Mayo hiring and firing, is what percentage of team owners do you think are good? What percentage of team owners do you respect the way that they run the team? And is this just so prevalent that it's not actually a reflective or discerning element of how we look at teams?
I think there's about 10 to 12 that are just absolute tire fires. Like, it is just
because
like,
the Dolphins are not the worst run team.
No, that's a funny thing about this is, like, Stephen Ross is a bad owner and he might not even be in the top 10 of bad owners. Like, that's how many there are.
Let me push back though here. I'm in a confrontational mood here this morning, Frank. Because I think what Jori just said is important here. A year and a half ago, the Texans had incompetent ownership that absolutely was going to lead that franchise to hell, right? And 3 years ago, the Patriots had the smartest owner in all of sports. And it's like, oh, man, Robert Kraft's got it taken care of. And now we see it. At some point, we just got to accept finding the right coach is like winning the lottery, all right? And when you find one, you don't let him go. Finding the right quarterback is like, we know this about quarterbacks. We know that going into the draft is an inexact science and you got to win the lottery. What we got to start doing is accepting that's a part of the logic for the entire thing. You are just basically, you got to be so rich as an owner that you can keep buying expensive lottery tickets over and over and over again and hoping like hell sometime you get it right, because the Texans were a disaster and now they're smart. Ownership didn't get better. They just finally got lucky with a coach that then also got lucky with the quarterback. And Robert Kraft suddenly didn't forget how to own an NFL team. He just no longer has a Hall of Fame coach with a Hall of Fame coach. It's amazing how much easier this all looked if you were the Saints and you were the Saints. I just knocked my coffee over. I'm so passionate about it. It's amazing how much easier this looked like when you were the Saints.
Do we want to do something about this?
Are we going to short out the laptop? Yeah, I just
but think about the Saints. The Saints didn't suddenly figure out like how to be a bad team. They just no longer have Sean Payton and Drew Brees. I'm just saying. I'm going to pick up my coffee while you discuss.
No, I get that, and I don't disagree. Like, look, if you end up hiring smart people beneath you, then you're going to look a lot smarter. By the way, this is the argument why no owners should be allowed in the Hall of Fame. You know, like it's ridiculous owners are in the Hall of Fame because it all comes down to who's really running the show, the football side, who's your coach, who's your quarterback. But anyway, off of that tangent, yes, you're right. Stephen Ross would look a lot smarter if his coach worked out. But don't they have, like, I think Mike McDaniel's a pretty solid coach. I think Tua's a pretty good quarterback, and they still stink. Like, again, there's some franchises that are just drawing dead before the season even starts, before the offseason even starts, because they just don't know. Do you guys trust the Bears to get this hire right? I sure don't.
No.
You guys trust the Jets to get this hire right?
I trust them to get it wrong.
Nope. Right, exactly. These... we trust, Fitz, the Raiders to get this hire right? Nope. This is going to be their fifth coach in 5 seasons. There's a reason. It's not because just all these coaches happen to be bad. It's because the process is bad, because the leadership is bad at the top.
But you make such a good point about the Texans, because I think that, we hear all the time in the NFL and in every sport, winning solves everything, or winning like Band-Aids everything. And I think we saw that in Houston. Everything looked so bad until it didn't. And when we look at what happened in New England and Las Vegas, it's like if they were winning, the way those coaches' comments were portrayed would have been so different. The way that the game management stuff was portrayed would have felt so different, because all of this is just exacerbated. And it's like the reality is in every single game, there are bad decisions, bad throws, bad catches, drops, all of that. And in every single game, there are good things. And so it's like, yes, if you're watching red zone, you're only going to see the highlights. But if you're watching the full game, these things happen all the time. And the degree to which we emphasize them is really correlated with the result of the games.
Brilliant point by you. We'll get into the hirings and firings. Real quick, before we do that, Tyreek Hill, will he be a Dolphin next season, Jori?
Yes.
Frank?
I'm 50-50 on it. I'll go 51-49 no. I think that, again, I think this is their off-ramp. I think they look and say, that dude ain't Tyreek Hill anymore. He's good, but he ain't great. And is he worth $29 million on the salary cap? I don't know. Hey, Tyreek, you want out? Okay, well, I guess we have to trade you. I think it might be that kind of a situation.
The ultimate buy low, sell high to me. If you're the Dolphins right now, it's a perfect time to sell him. Look, you're going to get more going into this draft because people are still infatuated with Tyreek Hill. Let him go somewhere else. Take his money to someplace else. Start over at that position because you're not a Super Bowl caliber team either way. All right, let's get into the hirings and firings. I'll take a moment, compose myself. First, we'll take a quick break.
Introducing Daily Draw, the latest free-to-play game from Yahoo Sports. Daily Draw gives you a pack of 6 prediction cards every day based on the day's biggest sporting event. Download or update the Yahoo Sports app on the Apple App Store or Google Play and join the action with Daily Draw today.
All right. Hirings and firings of head coaches and GMs galore. We've touched on it a little bit. I'll give you guys the floor for a second because I'm about to go on for a minute. Frank, anything you want to get off your chest quickly before I just pull up my soapbox? Because this is going to take a second.
Okay. The one thing I will say is that, we all do like radio hits and stuff. And what do they ask all the time this time of year? Which opening is the best? And you know what my answer is? None of them. All these openings stink. Every single one of them. If I'm a Ben Johnson, I'm looking around at the openings going, whoa, this is what I waited for. Can I come back to Detroit for another year? The best one might be the Patriots because I'm not sold on this Bears thing. Look, Caleb might be awesome. Everybody talks about the quarterbacks, right? Like, oh, which quarterback is there? That's the best opening. Well, yeah, Caleb, he's no sure thing, by the way. And that organization stinks. Like we've talked about, especially when Charles is on, like how bad the power structure is and all that. There's a reason the Bears have not won a Super Bowl since 1985. There's a reason the Bears have not had an all-pro quarterback since 1950. Like this is a bad organization. We don't talk about them as one of these like, oh, the Jaguars or the Jets or whatever, but the Bears are down there too. This is a bad franchise. So I don't know that necessarily that I'd want to hitch my coaching future to them. What do you want to go to the Saints? You want to go to the Raiders? Like all these, like it's just a bad time to be an assistant looking for a job. Unless I think the Cowboys is decent. Everything else is just, oh God, you're just praying to turn things, do a 360 on these teams because it's bad everywhere among all 6 of these openings.
I mean, I think Jori sort of talked me into the Jags being a quality opening until Trent Baalke stayed. Like, I don't know that I love that portion.
That would have been okay, but Trent Baalke stays, and Shad Khan doesn't care. Shad Khan kept Trent Baalke for one reason. It was a hassle to get a new general manager and head coach. It costs time, it costs money, it's effort, and Shad was like, I don't care. Just hire whoever.
Basically, Frank, you're saying like the studies have shown that people don't change insurance companies once they've signed up because they just don't want to go through the grief of changing insurance. I love the concept of like Shad treating it like a bank. I don't want to change banks because then I have to figure out all my direct deposits. Just keep Trent.
Yeah,
that's why. Jori,
well, I have so many things in my life right now that I need to figure out along those lines with insurance and banks that I'm like, yes, I feel that shotgun. I too am keeping Trent Baalke.
You are the keeping Trent Baalke of your car insurance, yes.
Yeah. I just love that. Like, and look, Jori, knowing you well, like I cannot imagine at this point what it is like for you because you are such an analytical, like very lined up, like everything has to, right. Just the thought of you going through the process of trying to figure out how to change insurance. I pray for everybody around you. It's that's just got to be a lot of stress.
There's a board behind her somewhere.
Yeah,
with
your
all
apartment floods and you're like,
and...
months later, we're still not done dealing with this. What are we going to do now?
Oh, God. All right,
Fitz, I'm ready. I'm ready for the rant. I can't wait for this. Yes.
Okay. I get asked a lot about what the Raiders did, and let me stress here, Antonio Pierce deserved to be fired. And I don't say that because I root against the man or the coach. From the outside looking in, Antonio Pierce seems like a great dude. He seems like the sort of dude you want to hang out with, and I understand why guys wanted to play with him. But it doesn't change the fact that when you actually look at the responsibilities, ask yourself, what did Antonio Pierce actually accomplish to deserve keeping the job? Now, hear the argument, seriously, that he had no quarterback, and you can't win without a quarterback. I understand that, but Look at the other things involved in this conversation. Who picked the offensive coordinator eventually that ran this team? Well, Antonio Pierce picked Luke Getsy. And if you watched the Bears last year, you knew that was a bad hire from day one. I said it when it happened that it was a bad hire. So now you've got a rookie coach that has picked a bad offensive coordinator, which is not going to help the development. At the end of the season, he sits up and says he sort of trusted his gut at the quarterback position. Well, why did you not trust your gut? In fact, you were allowed to build the largest staff in the NFL, full of consultants that are all your former head coaches to help you become a head coach. And one thing that I would think those 20-something coaches that are sitting around just helping you be a head coach would tell you is trust your gut. And if they didn't tell you that, why were they on staff? Why did you pick those people to help guide you? Or if you didn't take their advice, what were you doing? Look across the board at game management situations that over and over weren't good enough. Look at the number of times that Antonio Pierce has sat at a microphone and ask yourself, why does he constantly say the wrong things? Look at the fact that they needed a players-only meeting only 3 weeks into the season to talk about some of the issues in the locker room for a CEO coach that's supposed to create the right locker room. We look at all of these things that went wrong. And I think what happens is a lot of times we look from the outside looking in and we just simply say, well, another black coach was only given one chance in the league, 1 year in the league. It's not fair. I understand that that is often a correct narrative. In this situation, I would beg everybody to look at the actual work of Antonio Pierce and find me what he did so well that you think that it's worth giving him another year in this process. Ultimately, the only way the Raiders can compete long-term is to find a coach that can compete with 3 Hall of Fame caliber football coaches that are in their division and a quarterback that can compete with 3 of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. Antonio Pierce did nothing in his 1 year to show that he's deserving of that. And just like we accept the fact that Aiden O'Connell was pretty good sometimes, but is not the future, it's okay to also say, hey, our coach was pretty good sometimes, but is not the future. The faster you move on from a mistake when you know you don't have the right person in the building, the better. And yes, it frustrates me to be going through yet another coaching hire. And no, I have no faith that they're going to get it right. But at some point, you have to look at it and say, I have no faith that they got it right the last time. And change for the sake of change isn't a great thing. But change when you know you need to make it, even if it means you have to go back to square one, you got to do it. Jori, that's why I feel like at some level for me, even though I hate the fact that my favorite team is making another coaching change, if I own the Raiders, I would have fired Antonio Pierce. So I'm not going to fault Mark Davis for doing exactly what I would have done if I was in his shoes.
Very passionate, very articulate, Fitz. Just keep going. Frank and I are actually going to take the day off and let you just carry on.
That was good. That was good.
That was good. So here's what I want to do. I don't want to take the conversation away from the Raiders, but I would love to talk about the Raiders and Patriots in concert because they're in very similar positions right now. And I feel very differently about the way the Patriots made the decision. And so I want to give you that framework and you tell me how you guys think it applies to the Raiders and if you completely think I'm wrong on the Patriots too. So when I'm listening to Robert Kraft talk this week about firing Jerod Mayo after 1 season, albeit Jerod Mayo not only played for the Patriots and coached for them, but Robert Kraft wrote into his contract before Bill Belichick left that he was going to be Bill Belichick's successor. And then Robert Kraft got up less than a year ago and said, I am as convicted in hiring Jerod Mayo as my head coach as I was in hiring Bill Belichick as my head coach. People thought I was wrong then too. Less than a year later, it's Robert Kraft saying, now I think I'm wrong. And the reason that I think that this is just so concerning, 2 reasons. First of all, when you listen to Robert Kraft talk about what's going on with the front office and why he is keeping Elliott Wolf and his staff, the general manager and his staff, despite the fact that they have had really bad talent. And I'm not saying that they should fire the personnel, but he said, we've had really bad drafts for a while. And when you look at the way that they've helped our processes, they have made progress. Okay, well, if you've had really bad drafts for a while, you clearly do not have the personnel you need to win. And so I think you need to factor that into assessing Jerod Mayo. Second, when he talked about Jerod Mayo, it is fair, as Robert Kraft said, that the Patriots regressed down the line this season. There were a lot of issues late in the season that I think were concerning, and I don't think Jerod Mayo handled everything well, and I think he handled some things poorly. But Robert Kraft said the reason he was making this decision is he said, in 2023, we won 4 games. I didn't like that. In 2024, we won 4 games. I can't take this for another year. So you're basically telling me that you started this clock on Jerod Mayo and how long you were willing to let him grow and him to establish his culture a year before he was the head coach. And to me, it's like, well, then you're clearly not setting up a guy to succeed. You know he doesn't have the roster. You know that he doesn't have the culture. You know that your scouting department's a mess because, Bill Belichick did like 20 jobs and you hired one person to replace him, not 20 people to replace him. And now I get that they're probably going to get Mike Vrabel. I hate to say this, but they pretty much fulfilled their Rooney Rule requirements really quickly with coaches who are not even in the league right now.
By the way, that was really
and I would expect Mike Vrabel to be their head coach by the weekend. But when I look at this, I say, I'm not even trying to defend necessarily that Jerod Mayo should be their coach in 2025. I'm saying, how can you as an organization have success if you're not honest about the fact that so much of what went wrong this year for the Patriots was about the state of the team that Bill Belichick left it in? And so when I look at the Raiders also, I say, I'm not saying that if a team regresses, you can always come back from that. I'm not saying that either Jerod or Antonio had perfect game management, handled the media comments perfectly. Like, they definitely made some missteps. But I think, one, as we saw in Houston, win some games, you can get the locker room back real quick when you win games. I don't think that these things are necessarily the holes that we put them in. And at what point are you just going to keep turning over the organization when, as mentioned, it's often from the top and the ownership that is the problem and the things that have happened beforehand. And if you're not ever going to switch the context, it doesn't really matter who you're bringing in, does it?
We do have to address, and I think this is out there and it's been talked about. It is troubling that the two one and done coaches are both black, that Rand Carthon gets fired, a black general manager. Well, Brian Callahan, who did nothing this year to prove he's a quality NFL head coach, gets a second chance. The Patriots fired Jerod Mayo after 1 year when they expected him to win more than 4 games. I was actually impressed he won 4 games, to be honest with you. That was a bad roster he got. Well, Elliott Wolf, who drafted Jalen Polk in the second round, gets to keep his job. Like, I'm not saying, like you talked about Fitz, and this is true. Each individual case, you could say, well, yes, Jerod Mayo didn't win enough games, and there were some sloppy things and some things he was getting wrong. Antonio Pierce, why would you bring him back? And I mean, each individual case you can look at, you can say Rand Carthon spent a ton of money last offseason, and they had the worst team in the NFL. But when you put them all together, all of a sudden, we can't get out of this rut of black head coaches and black general managers getting very little patience and not getting a second chance either. Is Jerod Mayo ever going to get another chance? I doubt it, honestly. Like, maybe he's a young guy and he's a good leader and all this kind of stuff. And I hope that he kind of rehabilitates his career and gets another shot 2 or 3 years down the road. But the odds are against him. And that's just the truth. And we look at New England doing these absolute sham interviews to satisfy the Rooney Rule. Let's be honest. Let's call it what it is. Like, we know Pep Hamilton has a 0% chance of getting that job. We all know that. And that's nothing against Pep, who's been a good coach for a long time.
And you have insiders tweeting like, great call. He's got so much respect, such a resume. I'm like, let's stop. Let's stop.
Let's just stop. We know what happened. They want to hire Vrabel by the end of the week, and they had to get this box checked. That's all it is. And so the NFL, how much progress have we really made? They've tried. The NFL has done whatever. Like, the Rooney Rule was well-intentioned. It just doesn't work. And black coaches are getting, hired, but then they get absolutely no, like, Lovie Smith, David Culley. Like, we could go an inordinate amount of one-and-done coaches are black. Now, not all of them, Nathaniel Hackett, Urban Meyer, whatever, but it just seems like there's more patience afforded to white counterparts, right? Like Elliott Wolf, like Brian Callahan, when Jerod Mayo's not getting that shot, Antonio Pierce is not getting, and the NFL, I don't know how to fix this. And it's been a thing that I've covered this league for more than 20 years. It's been something we've been talking about since I started covering the league.
Well, and real quick before Fitz says something, I want to note that it's not that Jerod or Antonio did a perfect job, but are people calling for Brian Callahan's job? Because I'm not hearing it if they are, and he's keeping it. And so the point is, yes, usually, especially first-time coaches, make mistakes in their first year. And Frank, you're saying it perfectly, is when people are making mistakes, how are we responding to it, and what degree of patience are we affording them?
Right. Jerod Mayo had no chance to succeed this year. None. If that was, like Robert Kraft said, okay, we won 4 games last year, and I was sick of it. We won 4 games again. He was not in a position to win more than 4 games. If that was the bar, then he was set up to fail from the jump. He's a rookie head coach.
Kraft also said that he's like, the peak was when we beat the Bengals week 1. Okay, well then you had unrealistic expectations if you thought what happened in one NFL week was reflective of what your roster could do.
Look, when we were covering the draft, immediately after they drafted Drake May, I said on our draft show for Yahoo, this is great for the Patriots because they're going to have the first pick in next year's draft. They have the worst roster. They're going to be able to dress best player available. and they didn't somehow. So I do think it's fair to say Jerod Mayo certainly, I think letting Jerod Mayo go to me was pretty shocking. I agree with that. Also, I think Brian Callahan, whether he turns out to be a good coach or not, should be fired. I don't think he did anything in year one to show that he deserves that job. And I don't think you should hamstring a new GM. You're either limiting your GM candidates day one to only people that want Callahan as your coach, which is stupid, or you're simply like you're changing the power that you give whoever you bring into the building, which is also stupid. So I think this is a terrible move by the Titans to not simply clean house top to bottom. I just think that we can't apply the universal, like there's a little boy who cried wolf here. If we make everything about one conversation point, if we don't look at each particular case with nuance. I happen to have watched so much of Antonio Pierce. I was somebody that supported his hiring. I understood last year why they were going to hire Antonio Pierce. There was a vibe and an energy to it, but I don't think that you can turn around then and simply apply universal logic to all of it. I think one of the differences here, Dan Campbell is a great example of a coach that didn't do well at first, but I've talked plenty. For Yahoo, go back and watch the interviews with Aiden Hutchinson, with Amon-Ra St. Brown, with Goff. We've done several interviews, and I've asked all of them the same question. What changed when you started that second year so poorly and everything turned around? What changed in the culture in the locker room? And the answer I got from everybody was nothing. We all understood what we were building to, and we were all building together. Go back and think about those Lions teams that were terrible that turned around. There wasn't a sense of infighting or battling. Even when fans were screaming for Dan Campbell's job, the Ford family was turning around saying, no, we trust what we're doing here. I do think there is some element of when you're in the room, you can feel the vibe of if you've got the right guys or not the right guys. And so I don't think the answer here is that, I just don't think we can universally apply one thing to all of this. I think Brian Callahan should have been fired. I don't think that the Titans have their long-term coach. And if you ask me today, they're going to be in the same exact damn situation that the Bears were with Eberflus, where they kept Eberflus and all they did was try and ruin Caleb Williams in the process. I think they're going to do the same dang thing in Tennessee with the first overall pick in next year's draft that I think is going to be a quarterback. So I think this is one of those weird years where some coaches just did a terrible job. And again, like I would run through walls listening to Antonio Pierce talk. I don't think he's a good football coach. I don't think he was ready for the job. So the other portion of this is I heard Max Crosby on his Sirius XM show the other night say, and I will, full disclosure here, I'm friends with Max. We text. I did not ask him about this. I don't want to ask him about this because I don't want to say anything I shouldn't in our conversation. But I heard him on the Sirius XM show when he was asked about what he went to the Raiders with at the end of the season. He said, I want to know a plan. I want to know how we're going to turn this thing around right now, not 8 years from now. I don't want to be winning when I'm at the end of my career. I want to be able to win right now. If I'm Mark Davis and my best player comes in and says, I want out if there's not a way for us to win right now, I'm certainly going to look around and say, well, I know I'm not getting a quarterback this year. I don't have a clear path to one of those. So the only way I'm going to win is if I can outcoach everybody. Do I have the coach in the room that can outcoach everybody? This year, with more games under his belt, I saw that I don't. Like, what do you do in that situation? You don't just keep the coach because you're worried about the perception of firing a coach too soon. You don't keep a coach unless you believe that coach can actually win you football games. And I don't know what AP did.
I do agree with you, but I think that one and done is being used too often now. Like that is nuclear, hit the button. Like this is, we need the eject button because this is so bad. Urban Meyer, Nathaniel Hackett, two very good examples. Fine. Yeah, Hackett was it was so bad. Like it was just, and Urban was the worst coach I've ever seen in my life.
Sorry.
Maybe in any league I've ever seen, Urban Meyer was the worst coach. But now it's like, well, we went 4-13 with Jared Mayo. He's got to go. Well, doesn't that reflect on you? Like Robert Kraft, like he was your guy. You have no faith in him turning it around. Like all of us, any job we've ever had, this job, doing this show, you make mistakes your first time around. Like this is not unusual. And for teams to pull this card so often now, it's just regular. You're getting no continuity whatsoever in your organization. I think back to Zach Taylor, and we could say whatever we want about Zach Taylor, right? But the fact is, he was like 5-23 at one point, and he ended up taking the Bengals to a Super Bowl. There was some patience shown there. You should have some conviction in your hire. When they decided to give Antonio Pierce the job, they should have some conviction with that. No, this is my guy. I'm going to see this through. Right or wrong, the Giants are doing that with Brian Daboll. Like they said, no, we're stopping the merry-go-round. He's going to get a shot to show he could do this more than just two losing years and he's done. I think the Patriots screwed this up. Like I get that Jared Mayo was doing some things wrong and they weren't getting better on either side of the ball. And there were reasons to fire him. But when you do one and done, that's a reflection of your organization. It ain't really a reflection of the coach as much.
I also would say, Frank, that if I'm the NFL and I'm saying, what do we want to do to try and make hiring more equitable? I would consider having the owners vote, and I don't think they're going to pass it, but I would ask them to vote on requiring all head coaches to be there for at least 2 years. And if you want to fire a head coach in under 2 seasons or in after the first season, maybe 1.5, I think you have to submit some sort of request for appeals. So yes, the Urban Meyer situations we need to get out. Because my thing is, and I'm not saying this should just be for minority coaches. I think this should be for everyone. This should be something like this. Is the way that someone put it to me recently, and I've mentioned this on the show, is you don't only want to be sure that you're going to have a better coach. You want to have a coach that's so much better that it also accounts for all of the turnover that you have to go through, because you are putting your team at a disadvantage when you do this. And both Jerod Mayo and Antonio Pierce did not have rosters to compete. Antonio Pierce did not have a quarterback. No one thought, look, where they went wrong most of all was not during the season. It was during the draft, assuming that they could wait for Michael Penix to be there. And then, you get rid of Devontae Adams in the middle of the season. I do not think that that is something that reflects most on the coach. And I think what's interesting about the Giants is that Joe Schoen...
But does it, wait, Joey, does it not? I mean, does Devontae Adams, does your best player on offense coming in midway through the season saying, nah, I don't want to be here anymore?
Okay, but Fitz,
does that not reflect on the culture?
In this job? Tom Telesco did not go anywhere with the Chargers. All he did was luck into Justin Herbert. Maybe he evaluated him and he got one quarterback, and he's the one staying on. Well, he should be the one who's responsible for not getting the quarterback for the Raiders.
Look, I don't disagree. I would clean house. I would clean house completely. I think the only reason Tom Telesco has a job right now is he was hired after Antonio Pierce, so he had no. Again, this is the Raiders did the stupid thing that I say is stupid all the time. They brought in a GM after they hired their coach, which I think is asinine. And then Telesco, he got several players in last year's draft that turned out to be difference makers. So the reason that I've heard that Telesco still has a draft is not just Brock Bowers. I mean, they get Brock Bowers in the first round. They get 2 starting offensive linemen in the next couple of rounds, and they get a couple of guys that also play quality minutes for him. So the concept was this year he did well in the draft, so he deserves another year. Christian Wilkins wasn't on the field enough to know if that $100 million contract was worth it. I don't disagree with you. I would clean house completely. I don't think the answer here is keep Antonio Pierce if you're going to keep Tom Telesco. I think the answer here is fire everybody. When you suck, fire everybody. Now, Frank.
But Fitz, wouldn't you say, yes, I get it. Okay, fine. But don't you think there's something to be said for continuity and patience? This is going to be your team's 5th coach in 5 years if we count interims, Bisaccia. You're never going to get off this wheel if you keep doing this. This is not
the problem
something
here
that's conducive to success.
And also, Fitz, tell us, who do you think, I'm not asking who you want to be your coach. Give me 1 through 3, the most likely next head coaches for the Raiders. Not what Vegas is saying, but who you which is funny that they're Vegas. But who do you think is going to be the next coach that you're like, this is going to be so much better than Antonio Pierce?
Nobody. I think
right.
coaching is so inexact.
Why are you blowing things up when you don't have a better option?
Because you don't have the right option. This is sort of like if you're in a relationship, Jori, and you know that your boyfriend is just absolutely trash, but you're not sure that you can find better than trash out on the open market. You don't stay in the relationship. You try again. If you're
going through that many boyfriends in that many years, probably about you more than the boyfriend.
100%. And I think at the core, the biggest issue here that we're all agreeing on in this, and by the way, for the record, to say very clearly, I think the Patriots got it wrong with Jerod Mayo. I'm not as intrinsically familiar with everything with the Patriots the way I am with the Raiders. I think the Raiders did the right thing in firing Antonio Pierce. I think the Raiders did the wrong thing in keeping Tom Telesco. I think the Titans should have fired everybody.
They did the wrong thing in hiring Tom Telesco.
I agree with that too. That's the biggest point. The biggest problem we have here is that what do you do when your owner doesn't identify talent well? Because ultimately it's going to be the same owner that's being asked to identify talent. The only thing I would say is if you told the Texans and the Texan fan base that they had to get rid of Culley and Lovey in 1 year to get to D'Amico, they would do it 10 times out of 10 times. They have what's considered a very good, stable head coach. That's the only thing.
By the way, one thing I will say about the Patriots, I don't think it was right for them to get rid of Mayo. If they end up with Vrabel, who I really respect as a head coach,
I know.
All right, annoying. Okay, I get it. If you know, and look, these NFL teams know, right? They know, this is possible. We can do this. It's not a sure thing, but hey, if you're available, everybody works behind the scenes. Everybody knows that, et cetera, et cetera. If they do end up with Vrabel, okay. I hate it. It sucks for Jerod Mayo to be the kind of the pawn here, but Mike Vrabel's a really good, proven head coach.
I'm not reporting anything here. I don't have any reporting on this. The people that I've talked to that I think are pretty smart in the know, the 2 names that they've told me repeatedly that seem to be interested in the Raiders and the Raiders seem to be interested in them are Mike Vrabel, who we all believe is now going to be the Patriots coach.
Brady.
We'll see.
He can't coach every team.
Right.
That'd be awesome
But
if he did, though.
It's just not how this works. It's not like an all-time quarterback going both
I would
ways.
love that.
I would just say that the person that I know that's most connected there texted me when the Patriots stuff happened. It was like, I was convinced Vrabel was about to be your head coach. I don't think so now. I don't know. But Vrabel and Pete Carroll are the two names that I've been told repeatedly in the last 48 hours are interested in the Raiders job at some level. Are Vrabel and Pete Carroll an upgrade over Antonio Pierce? Yes. Can I go to Max Crosby and say I'm bringing in this established coach because I think they can turn things around more quickly? Yes. Do I think that the Raiders would have made this move if they didn't have somebody else in mind that they were going to hire? No. I think the Raiders didn't do anything on Monday because they were spending Monday with Tom Brady putting feelers out to his buddies, tampering or not, to figure out who would or wouldn't be interested. So they figured out if they should make a move. Mark Davis hired John Gruden well before Rooney Rule be damned. I mean, Mark Davis knew he was hiring John Gruden when he fired Jack Del Rio. Mark Davis does not make moves he doesn't want to make unless he's already got somebody else in place, in my experience. So I think they know who they're going to pick, and I think it's going to be an established coach.
Okay, can I just tell you, Tom Pelissero just reported as we're recording this that multiple NFL teams have reached out to Bill Belichick to inquire whether he would reconsider going to UNC and come back to an NFL team, including the Raiders.
That would be unbelievable. Like, just
It'd be
literally
so bad.
unbelievable to go like, yeah, I mean, yeah.
Also, the skeptical
don't-
part of me is when they're like, Tom Brady reached out to Belichick. Yeah, they probably do talk. Not shocking. He shouldn't do that. I would lose a lot of respect. On another note, I think that related to all of this is how we view the Giants going on Hard Knocks last offseason. The Giants have been absolutely slammed for going on Hard Knocks last season because they had a really bad season this year. They got rid of Saquon Barkley. He becomes the 9th player ever to rush for over 2,000 yards with the Eagles. Their quarterback situation didn't work out. And what's so fascinating to me is that this is all coming out around the time I was on my training camp tour. And I kept asking people, what did you think of that? And I had a lot of people from the agents to the scouts to the executives to even some coaches who said that if they were advising Joe Schoen, they would not have let him air something where his owner says, Saquon Barkley is our most popular player. You got to keep him. And he got rid of him. I think what was so interesting to me is that I came away from this saying, if this season doesn't work out for the Giants, Joe Schoen explained to John Mara and explained to anyone who watched Hard Knocks that he did not have his answer at quarterback, that he knew last year he needed a quarterback. And maybe he didn't get it last year. And oh, by the way, if he kept Saquon Barkley, I can tell you that Saquon Barkley would not have rushed for 2,000 yards with the New York Giants. I think we have plenty of evidence and a large sample size to understand that that was not happening. And to me, that is a big reason why this group is coming back is you are not always going to be in contending year as an NFL team in a league of parity. Now, the Giants have probably gone too long without being a contender, and I understand that. And they definitely underwhelmed this year, but I think that they knew all along they didn't have their quarterback. They moved on from Daniel Jones rather than have to take up that injury guarantee. Now they're in position to get one of the quarterbacks. And so to me, I understand the plan. And when I listened to the Chicago Bears, and they had all sorts of phrases in their post-season press conferences, and we were emphasizing outcome too much over process. Well, I give the New York Giants credit for emphasizing process because they were not going to be able to give Saquon Barkley the infrastructure to have the success he had. They needed to get to where they have a new quarterback. And now they have Malik Neighbors. They've got guys like Dexter Lawrence. I think they have talent. And I think that Brian Daboll is someone I would trust more than the unknown, and we don't know who that is, to develop that young quarterback. So they should at least try.
Yeah, I agree. I actually agree. Like, people freaked out about the Giants bringing their guys back, but at some point, you got to stick it through. You have to plant your flag and say, you know what, we hired this guy. Let's see it through. By the way, a couple things off of that. Nobody's ever doing Hard Knocks off season again. Nobody. They saw the way Joe Schoen has been dragged all season for the one Saquon Barkley clip. Nope, never going to happen again. We are not letting you into our front office to do this because we don't want to be the team on that clip of letting whoever go in free agency, which happens all the time in the NFL, by the way. It's just the Hard Knocks cameras aren't there to watch it. The other thing that we mentioned Tom Brady, and I wrote about this yesterday, so I do want to bring it up real quick. I find it fascinating. Tom Brady, limited owner of the Las Vegas Raiders, is going to be part of their head coaching interview process, right? He's going to be in on the interviews, advising Mark Davis. Who knows what kind of say he has? He is theoretically going to be a part of the interview with an offensive coordinator on Friday and then call his game on Sunday for Fox. Like, this is ridiculous to me. Like, I can't believe the NFL's allowing this to happen. Like, we've already talked about the conflict of interest between Brady being a part owner and Brady being a Fox announcer. Now we've taken it to another level. He's not just like a 5% owner who's like a figurehead. We're talking about a dude who's going to be interviewing assistant coaches like Ben Johnson. He's going to be like in on interviews with Ben Johnson one day, and 2 days later, he's going to be calling the Detroit Lions in the Super Bowl. Like, this is absolutely just mind-numbing to me that this is being allowed to happen.
Yeah, I will say to that end, there's a former Raider named Marcel Reese. And if anybody has been around the Raiders organization for several years, Marcel Reese was the right-hand man to Mark Davis for many years, until recently, until Tom Brady, basically. So Marcel Reese was paid to basically be the football mind next to Mark Davis for so many things. That is what they are now doing with Tom Brady in this ownership capacity. It does not surprise me. I would be stunned if Brady didn't have a wild say in the head coaching hire. I would be stunned if he doesn't have a wild say in the quarterback, what they're going to do moving forward. Like, this is essentially Tom Brady is somewhere between a GM and an owner, and he is going to be the type of GM owner, much like Michael Jordan in basketball, that has a day in, day out say on how the team's going to be run. I don't understand I understand why Mark Davis did that. I think that's part of why he sold Brady an interest in the team at a reduced cost, because he wanted Brady to be this football mind for him. I don't understand how the league can possibly justify keeping Brady in a broadcast role while he's doing that other role. Let me ask you, can I throw one Giants conspiracy theory at you?
All
right, this is not mine. I will credit one of my buddies that's a Giants fan that threw this out the other day, and it made me laugh. Is there any chance that the Giants knew, like, look, Mara wanted to be seen as a golden god. They know those cameras are there. We know that Hard Knocks is absolutely edited, as we saw with Antonio Brown with the Raiders. They take out anything. Teams have total edit right. The NFL has total edit right.
Creative control.
Right. So they can create whatever they want. The Giants could have asked for that clip to not be in there. But by putting that clip in there, it made Mara the good guy and everybody else the bad guy, while they also got out of the contract for one of their best players, while they turned around and went into a rebuild. Is it possible that everybody was just taking the marching orders? The whole thing was staged, and they were given the whole Saquon conversation, knowing full well that Mara's protected. I mean, you got everybody in the room back. Everybody in the room that debated the Saquon thing is back. It at least supports the thought that Joe Shane was just being a marching orders. Hey, let's have this debate. It makes for good TV. Mara looks like a golden god. I'll take it on the chin, and I'll keep my job.
It's a wrestling shoot all of a sudden. That's what we're doing here.
Do you think Joe Shane is to John Mara what Roger Goodell is to the NFL team owners? It's like, you take the punching bag. I don't have to do it. Oh, by the way, it's the 100th year of the Giants season. I think going back to the Raiders, though, what's interesting is Charles Robinson, our colleague, C-Rob, has reported on this, and his point was that whether or not Tom Brady is in all of these meetings, which it does seem increasingly likely that he will be in some of these meetings for these decisions, is Mark Davis trusts him so much and listens to him so much that Mark will end up reflecting and echoing what Brady says. And I think that that's a key distinction, is that he doesn't have to literally be there to voice his opinion if he has Mark's ear, and then Mark is going through and saying that.
And by the way, Tom, let's real quick, the comparison, I can't remember, I think it was you, Jori, brought up the Michael Jordan comparison. How did Michael Jordan work out with the Hornets?
I did not.
All of a sudden, the Raiders are just like, Tom Brady's going to get us out of this. What experience does Tom Brady have doing this? Tom Brady, one of the great quarterbacks of all time, probably greatest NFL player of all time,
Frank,
in terms of resume.
How well did Elway do at finding a quarterback for the Broncos?
He found one, and he won Super Bowl 50 with them. I mean, he did find one. Elway gets trashed all the time. Elway built a team that won a Super Bowl. Other than winning a Super Bowl, John Elway was terrible. Sure, okay. But
how did Elway do in the draft with quarterbacks? How did Elway do with every other quarterback not named Peyton?
Did not work out. Yeah. But I'm just saying, it's funny that we just are like, wow, Tom Brady's basically calling the shots with the Raiders because he has Mark Davis's here. What experience does Tom Brady have doing this? Tom Brady might be awesome at this. He's a really smart guy. He's a good leader and all that. Tom Brady has no experience doing this and might be an absolute failure and just set the Raiders back like Michael Jordan set the Hornets back.
Only thing I'd say to that is, what experience does Mark Davis have doing anything in his life other than inheriting a football team?
I can't argue that.
All right. We'll take a quick break. There's a couple other coaches we got to get into, like Tomlin and McCarthy. I can't believe we're even having the Tomlin conversation, but it's real. We'll break it down after a quick break. All right, guys, let me just quickly get this one out, because I'm seeing all the stuff of the Steelers trade Tomlin. Could this be it? Does Tomlin want to walk away from Pittsburgh? All of these things. Jori, is Mike Tomlin going to be the coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers next year?
I think the answer is yes. I think, first of all, I don't think the Steelers get rid of him in the sense that I don't think they're going to ask him out. I don't think they're going to try to trade him, and I don't think that they are going to fire him. Remember, like 3 months ago, people were saying he should be coach of the year. They definitely have regressed to the end of the season. I also think that there have been other points in Tomlin's tenure where he's regressed, and then he's figured out how to turn it around. So really, the season's not so different than some of their recent ones. What's most different is that he had more success early in the season as opposed to later in the season when he would often claw his way back to not having a losing season. And we would all be like, the streak lives on. I think what's interesting to me is that you also have to look at the setup that Mike Tomlin has in Pittsburgh, the same way Bill Belichick had a setup in New England, and say, is he going to have that degree of control anywhere else? And so maybe some people would want a fresh voice. I like to make the joke of like, oh, why don't Mike's McCarthy and Tomlin switch places? Not only because I'm committed to as many head coaches named Mike as possible, which Mike Vrabel is doing a good job of helping us out, but also because McCarthy's from Pittsburgh. They could each be a new voice, all of that. But there's such a setup in Pittsburgh that works really well and better than most of the league. It might not win a Super Bowl already, although someone the other day was like, they're not winning a Super Bowl with him. I'm like, they did win a Super Bowl with him.
Like
so
Mike McCarthy.
I think he's staying put. I would be interested to know, though, like, does Arthur Smith come back? I think that it seemed like for a while he had something figured out. But to me, one of the big things is not only does your scheme work, but also can you keep George Pickens motivated? And that's one of the things that I feel like is a crack in the fissure of what Mike Tomlin has done this year, is that when we look at what happened with guys like Antonio Brown and even Le'Veon Bell, though in a very different way, after they left, Mike Tomlin has really kept these personalities in check, so to say, during his time with the team. And I'm not even saying reining them in the sense of like not letting them be who they are, but just getting them to buy into the team above themselves. I mean, like the anti-Tyreek Hill conversation we had earlier. And I do not feel like at the end of this season or even at the beginning, George Pickens was in that place. And so that's what I would wonder is how, if you're Mike Tomlin and you're the Rooney's talking to him about coming back, who's going to be your offensive coordinator? Who's going to be your quarterback? How are you going to get the defense to sort of rebound from its late season decline? And how are you going to be able to keep guys engaged? Because I do think there was a fall off in terms of engagement, maybe not consciously, but at least subconsciously toward the end of this season.
Another name there is Deontay Johnson. We were all like, wow, yeah. Deontay Johnson's going really cheap. That's weird. And then we realized, oh, Deontay Johnson. Whew. Yeah, Mike Tomlin did a good job getting something out of him, I guess. So when it comes to Tomlin, I always say this about the Steelers. Whoever you hire as your next head coach, if you want Tomlin out, that's great. Whoever you hire as your next head coach, there's like a 95% chance he's not going to be as good as Mike Tomlin. It's just the truth. I think he did a great job at the beginning of the year, at least, with a really, really bad situation at quarterback. Like Russ has been exposed. I hate it because he was a guy who I was very, very excited about. That story was awesome. He was playing well. And then the wheels just fell off. And you just, when you take a look at the totality of everything, the Steelers, yeah, it didn't end pretty, but they went 10-7. You look at that roster, you look at the quarterback situation, you look at their passing game situation. They have really nothing in the passing game, and that includes George Pickens because he's entirely unreliable. Do you expect them to go better than 10-7 with that roster? I don't. I expected them to go like 6-11. So I think Tomlin, and the totality, did a good job. It's just recency bias where we say, well, they lost their last 4. It was terrible. But I will say this, like it was a good friend of mine, shout out to Frankie. He brought this name up and I went, okay, that actually does make some sense. He said, maybe Mike Tomlin is Andy Reid. If we remember Philly Andy Reid, what was the whole deal? Like Andy Reid was winning and winning and winning and winning. And he just got dumped on all the time because can't win the big one, can't win a Super Bowl. They kind of split. Andy Reid goes on and becomes a legend, right? First, no doubt, first ballot. Don't even need to wait to 5 years Hall of Famer in Kansas City. Philly got its Super Bowl II. Maybe that's a Steelers situation here where you just kind of say, we've run its course. And yeah, maybe the next guy we get isn't going to be as good as Mike Tomlin, but we're just going to try something different to see if we can ignite something. Whereas Mike Tomlin goes on to the Cowboys or whoever, Raiders, or he'd get a job in 5 minutes if he wanted to. Like Mike Tomlin's a future Hall of Famer, probably. That's what his resume says. And maybe he becomes Andy Reid, where he goes somewhere else and has great, great success and Super Bowls and reminds everybody, yes, this is really, truly an all-time great head coach.
Look, if Tomlin turns around and
regrets letting Andy Reid go.
Do you?
I don't think that they regret.
No, I don't think so either, because there's a butterfly effect where they never win a Super Bowl. And I don't think that they trade that Super Bowl for anything at all. And obviously, like Andy Reid probably doesn't regret it either because of what he's done with Kansas City, which has been legendary.
I know. And people are going to think I'm such a hater for asking this, but Andy Reid in Kansas City pre-Mahomes was a lot like Andy Reid in Philadelphia, right? Like, it's amazing how things change when all of a sudden you get Mahomes. Like, not that Andy Reid was already a great coach, but he became a superstar coach when he had a superstar quarterback. I'm just
same with Tomlin. Tomlin with
Yeah.
Roethlisberger, really, really good. And Tomlin without Roethlisberger is like, they're better than they should be. I mean, making the playoffs ain't no joke. Like, it's hard to do. But what's the ceiling here anymore with the Steelers and Tomlin? Like, I think you do have to at least ask that question, as crazy as it sounds.
Yeah, they just don't have a clear path to a quarterback. I don't
That's the
think you
problem,
can win
yeah.
in today's AFC without a superstar quarterback anymore. There are too many superstar quarterbacks that are in the prime of their career. Like, this is the best era of quarterback play we've ever seen. So I don't know how you compete when you've got Russell Wilson or Kenny Pickett. Like, they're never going to pick high enough to get a quarterback. There aren't enough quarterbacks to get to the Steelers. Like, look, if the Raiders want to trade their entire draft for this year over to the Steelers to get Tomlin, cool. I'll get an I Heart Mike Tomlin tattoo on my ass. Like, I'm all in on this. Like, Tomlin's a great head coach. I believe in Tomlin.
How will we know whether you got one?
Yeah, I don't know.
Because I'll put it up on social
That seems
media.
like the type of thing that you can say, because then you're like, oh, but I don't have to prove it because HR wouldn't support that.
Don't really need to get that proven to me. No,
I mean,
I'll take your word. I'm taking your word.
I don't think
Fitz.
there's any rule. Like, we'll have to ask Spoon, the ultimate boss here. Like, is there a rule against me putting a picture of my cheeks up on social? I don't know. I'm
gonna go with
feel like-
probably.
But what if it's one
Probably.
cheek and you can't really tell that it's a cheek? Okay, we'll go find out now. Yeah, I can't change the McCarthy fast enough. But the I Heart Tomlin thing, Mike, call me if you end up with the Raiders. I'll still pay up on that bet. All right, so Tomlin.
Okay, actually, before we move on from the Steelers, I know we're on coaches, but what are you guys doing with Russell Wilson after this season?
Oh boy,
And how? I'm
That's
curious, based on right now, what would you do? And based on the playoffs, like before we know the playoff outcome, and what do you need to see from him from the playoffs to convince you in or out of bringing him back in 2025?
I honestly probably bring him back, because what else do you got? Like, I just don't know what your other option is. And I don't place this all at the feet of Russell Wilson. Yes, he has struggled. But again, you got your only reliable, quote unquote, your only talented receiver is George Pickens, who's going out there and dropping three passes against the Bengals. Honestly, might have cost him that game. Like, Russell Wilson puts that pass right on Pat Freiermuth's hands, who had a great game. Pat Freiermuth is a good season. Puts it right on Pat Freiermuth's hands in fourth down, and he just drops it. Like, okay, well, that's not Russell Wilson's fault necessarily. It depends on the price. If Russell's like, sure, I'll come back for $40 million a year, I'm like, okay, see ya, Russ. Like, we're not doing that. It depends on the price, but I mean, just in a vacuum, yeah, I think I bring Russell back, because what's your other option?
Yeah, I think Russell has played himself into a mid-level contract that's in $25 million range, the way he's played,
Gino.
right?
He goes to Gino
yeah.
contract.
He's not going to get epic money from anybody. So why
And
not
what if
stay
he
with
says,
the Steelers?
I want 35 minimum?
Then you got
Per year.
to just cut bait.
You let him
You'd say
walk and
Justin
see if
Fields.
anybody actually
Yeah.
gives him 35. I think.
Yeah,
I think.
that's it. Yeah.
And then the other side of it is, if you can get him at a bargain basement price, and I think 25, 30 million is kind of bargain basement for a starting quarterback. Then I go out and aggressively try and get T. Higgins off the Bengals and give myself a take away from a division opponent and answer one of my biggest weaknesses. And then I just continue to make the wide receiver room better and better until I can eventually address the quarterback. I think that's how I'd handle it. All right. So McCarthy, to be clear, today is the day that Mike McCarthy's contract is over with the Dallas Cowboys. But contractually, they have a 1-week exclusive right for negotiation. So nobody else can reach out to him. As we know, the Chicago Bears asked for permission. As we now know, that permission was denied. So, Jori, what do we make of permission being denied by the Cowboys when we're trying to figure out what the future of Cowboys and McCarthy look like together?
Yeah, I think when I look at this, I say first, I asked, well, why is it denied and not delayed? Why is Mike McCarthy, like the Cowboys could have just not answered this request at first, but I think denying it now might still be similar to a delay. Dallas Morning News reporter David Moore, who has been around that team for a long time and I trust a lot, said, look, Mike McCarthy, Jerry Jones, they sat down, they had a conversation, then the Cowboys denied the request, which suggests that they're at least open to bringing him back, but maybe still working through the details. I do think there could come a time where if Mike McCarthy says, I want a 5-year deal or I'm not coming back, Jerry might be like, that's a little bit much for me. But I think to me, the biggest indicator that Mike McCarthy will be back with the Cowboys, and maybe I'll be eating my words on this, is that we have not heard of any other candidates who the Cowboys would bring in. And unless they're just playing this really close to the vest and, maybe they're going to go to the game this week when at Jerry World, Steve Sarkisian is coaching Texas and do something like that. I really don't know who else they would bring in. Now, do I think that someone like a Ben Johnson offensive mind would actually be better for the Cowboys? Yes, because I think that the Cowboys probably could use someone who has the offensive mind, even if he doesn't have all of the leadership proven, because I think that like Dak has done so much of that Dak will help elevate and keep the team in check regardless of who the coach is. But I'm not sure they're going to get someone like that. So I think to me, the likelihood is Mike McCarthy comes back. The likelihood is there's an expectation that, hey, we'll give you a little more leeway in free agency next year. We'll get you a running back in the first 3 rounds of the draft. Your offensive line will have more experience. You'll probably need another defensive coordinator because Mike Zimmer seems like he's ready to hang it up. I could be wrong, but he has kind of indicated that recently, and we'll give you another chance. Which I think is an average option. I don't think it's the best option. I don't think it's a terrible option, but I think that to me is where we're leaning. And then, hey, if it doesn't work out and they decide, like the Patriots seem like they're going to hire a coach this week. I don't think the Bears are. There are also candidates that the Bears can't even talk to yet because they have a playoff game this weekend. And even the candidates that they can talk to, they can do like one virtual interview. So I don't think that, well, some people are saying that would be a really bad look if Jerry Jones said, no, you can't interview with them and then doesn't bring Mike McCarthy back. I think denying one this week when you have exclusive negotiating rights, which is the whole reason you get exclusive negotiating rights, is not that big of a deal. What do you guys think?
I think that when we talk about, I talked about how the openings, the team-wise, they're not that good. None of these 6 openings. The flip side of that is I really don't think it's a great year for coaching candidates. Yes, Ben Johnson is the white whale. Everybody wants him. We have no idea what Ben Johnson would be as a head coach. None. Like he might be awesome. He might not. Everybody else has some flaws like that you're saying, yes, this guy could be a great coach, but we just don't know. Steve Sarkisian, like how often have college coaches failed miserably in the NFL? Every candidate, except maybe Vrabel, you come and you say, this guy ain't proven. So who is proven? Well, Mike McCarthy. I think people will be surprised if you looked up Mike McCarthy's career winning percentage and you looked up Sean McVay's career winning percentage. Who's better? Go look it up. Spoiler alert, it ain't Sean McVay, and both of them got 1 Super Bowl ring. So Mike McCarthy gets criticized all the time, right? But honestly, the results have been fine. Like maybe he's not this guy who's going to win 4 Super Bowls the rest of his career, but you could do a lot worse than Mike McCarthy as your head coach. And when it comes down to like how many years Mike McCarthy is going to get or how much money, Jerry Jones has the most valuable franchise sports-wise in the world. Who cares? Like, if he gives Mike McCarthy a 5-year deal and fires him after 1 year, the only thing that sets the Cowboys back with is Jerry Jones' pocketbook, and I think Jerry can afford that. So I don't think that should be an obstacle either. Give Mike McCarthy 4 or 5 years. Who cares? Jerry will just eat it if he has to fire him after a year. I still think Mike McCarthy is the best option for the Dallas Cowboys, as much as Dallas Cowboys fans would hate that if it happened.
Y'all, isn't this the MO for the Dallas Cowboys and Jerry Jones? Every time they have a contract situation of any sort, we all sit here and say, why isn't it taken care of? Every time it goes to the 11th hour and right before the clock hits midnight and everybody turns back into a pumpkin, suddenly, boom, mega deal done. To me, until I see Mike McCarthy is not the coach, I'm going to presume that he is the coach and they work something out. This is more a matter of, does Mike want to be there to me than Jerry? Because Jerry has been a fairly patient owner, as we've talked about ad nauseum on this show. Jerry managed to get all the deals done we didn't think he was going to get done. You're right. There is no salary cap for coaches. Let's remind everybody on that. And Jerry is one of the few coaches.
That doesn't mean that Jerry's paying top dollar, though.
But that's a crazy thing to me. Like, that's the one area where you should pay top dollar. Like, Jerry Jones should be saying, what advantage do I have over every other owner in the NFL? Not everyone. I mean, there's Walton money and all that kind of stuff, Kroenke, but mostly he could spend more than anybody else. So he should be like, whatever it takes. If I could go get Kyle Shanahan because I just offer whatever, like, I'm going to offer 3 times the market. Who cares? Like, I get rich people stay rich. Like, we shouldn't spend rich people's money, as Fitz has said, but Jerry Jones should just spend away coach, because that's one thing that doesn't affect the salary cap whatsoever.
It's also wild when you think about bad teams, reminding everybody that coaching contracts are not salary capped and they are fully guaranteed. So when we talk about all these one and done coaches, let's acknowledge the fact that Mark Davis has had 5 coaches, if you count interim coaches, in the last 5 years, as you said earlier, Frank. He is still paying John Gruden. He is still paying Josh McDaniels, right? Like, you look at those coaching contracts that were eliminated for the Texans after 1 year. They had to pay their way through on all of those. It is alarming how many owners are paying millions of dollars to coaches that are no longer part of the payroll. And then you got like Jerry Jones over here, who's just like, He doesn't pay that much, and he keeps coaches through the duration of their contract. So he's not wasting money on coaches that aren't part of the staff. Like it's pretty alarming to see how different that gets. It's funny to me that even some of the owners that are at least perceived as being cash poor compared to others are paying hundreds of millions of dollars in coaching contracts that are no longer valid anywhere. So it's
right.
It's wild.
Even if Mike McCarthy gets a 5-year deal and the Cowboys end up moving on after 2025, Mark Davis and the Raiders will still be playing more coaches.
Yeah, godly. That's crazy.
I still think they're paying like Tom Flores and Archell and like.
Oh
yeah,
my God.
they're
Okay.
paying everybody.
We got to get out of here. I will say before we get out of here, let me ask you two coaching names, and I'm just asking you, do you think they land somewhere this year? Jori, do you believe that Ben Johnson is going to be a head coach somewhere next year?
He absolutely will if he wants to be. I would say 70% chance, yes. I don't think it's completely out of the picture that he goes back to Detroit. I think he will interview with a few teams and decide whether he wants to. Because again, I don't think he's got a situation to succeed in Chicago if he goes there, or really most places, Las Vegas. So Jacksonville, maybe. But again, what are you going to do about the GM? So I'll say 70% yes, more than likely.
I would say 70% too, because at some point you got to make the jump. Your star's not going to be bright forever. Like it can look at Bobby Slowick, who could have got, I mean, his star is dimmed a lot in a year. I don't think that'll happen to Ben Johnson, but you never know. But at the same time, again, Ben Johnson has to be looking at these openings and going, where do I succeed? Like, where's the foundation for me organizationally for me to succeed? Chicago, really? A team that hasn't won since 1985? I don't know. So I think I'm with Jori, about 70%, where I could see Ben Johnson coming back to Detroit just saying, I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and none of these jobs he's a young guy still, too. None of these jobs are setting me up for long-term success.
Which, by the way, is another reason the Cowboys should be going after Ben Johnson, because it's like when people are talking about where Mike McCarthy could go. I do believe Mike McCarthy can get another job if he wants, should the Cowboys not bring him back. But the Saints roster is much worse than the Cowboys roster. The Bears roster may be similarly talented, and I'm not saying Dak's got the arm talent that Caleb Williams has, but I think in terms of the as a whole, but your culture, you cannot succeed with the president, GM, head coach situation and all the pieces that they're missing. So the Cowboys should be a much more attractive job than I think people are making it out to be, especially if you're an offensive mind who can get the most out of Dak Prescott, who has a long track record of being very good, even if in the postseason he is not yet been
second in the MVP
great.
voting last year. Like, I get he didn't have a good year, but
I just don't think the
Lions not bad.
I don't think the Lions are going to win the Super Bowl, unfortunately, this year. And I think these openings are mostly trash. So I'm leaning more towards McCarthy stays, Ben Johnson stays because he looks around and thinks these opportunities aren't good enough, and I'd rather win a Super Bowl here and then continue to watch my star rise. One other quick name, because I've heard it bannered about so much. John Gruden. Jori, do you think John Gruden is back? Reports are that he's out and going to get interviews. Are you buying that John Gruden has a shot at being a coach again in the NFL next year?
I would say he gets interviews as a head coach and a job as an offensive coordinator, because I don't think anyone's quite ready to take that PR step of hiring him as the head coach. But if he has a successful year as an offensive coordinator and it's a what have you done for me lately league, I think he'll be able to do it.
Yeah, I'm putting this at like 5%. I just can't see it. Like, the reason he got fired from the Raiders is the same reason I don't think he's going to get hired. Like, it's tough. It's tough to get over that. And it's not like John Gruden was just dominating with the Raiders or anything. Like, it wasn't like, oh my God, John Gruden's back and he's Jim Harbaugh. And like, he was all right with the Raiders. I just don't think it's good. No, I'll say no. No, John Gruden's not a head coach in the NFL.
But Frank, you just said it wasn't a good year for head coaching candidates. So how does that impact it?
It's true. Yeah. I mean, you might get desperate enough if you're the Saints and nobody's taking your job, because I don't think anybody's going to take the Saints job who has other options. Yeah, maybe it gets, but again, like,
he's been in salary cap hell before. The Saints are in salary cap hell. He knows sure Derek Carr. Oh. Like, he knows Derek Carr. I mean, I don't know. I don't think he should get another opportunity, but God, when I heard it, I had to ask the experts. What I know is that we'll break down Friday. More news will be there by the time. And you thought today was contentious. C-Rob will be with us on Friday, which means we'll find something to argue about. We always do. We appreciate Stone putting all of this together and listening to every second of it. If you've listened this far, take a moment, rate, review, subscribe. Really helps us out. We're on our own feed, so make sure that you're out there. Plus, check out the Daily Draw game out on Yahoo Sports if you haven't checked it out yet. It's a lot of fun. Big football games. You can go out. You can open the pack of cards. You can can get some cards there. It's a points contest. It's really fun. It's really easy. I'm having a blast doing it. You should try it out too. Daily Draw is really awesome in the Yahoo Sports app. Follow us on Twitter. You know what to do. In the meantime, tell your friends and family and enemies, everybody, to check us out on Friday. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. Have a great week.